All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I was thinking, right? Earlier today, my apartment was a bit of a mess. It was pretty dirty. It was disgusting. It's pretty much all millennials' apartments are, right, Brian? I know you and I have the most
Mi-
disgusting fail apartments of all time.
Mine is beautiful. It's spotless. The walls are bare. There is no furniture. There's basically no fixtures in the apartment. It's the cleanest millennial apartment because it's absolutely empty.
No, absolutely, same. But, I thought earlier I should probably clean and, put together my apartment again. And you know what, Brian? I ate shit. I fell. I broke a couple windows. I accidentally punched a hole through the wall. And I was like, wow, I'm really disrespecting my surroundings.
So it sounds more like your surroundings were disrespecting you in this instance.
They really were. But you know what? Speaking of things that I know you love and disrespecting your surroundings, Brian, that gave me the idea that we should review the A Day to Remember album, Homesick. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational
Cringe millennial moment of the week.
Woo! Yeah! All right. And, Brian, I was thinking about doing something related to A Day to Remember, pop punk, metalcore in general for our Cringe Millennial segment, as you did last week. But, the day after we recorded our last episode, I saw a hilarious story on YouTube about a famous YouTuber who's gotten into a lot of trouble. Now, Brian, this week I want to talk about Eric Conover. Now, are you familiar with this story?
No, thankfully I'm not. I don't. That name means nothing to me.
All right, fantastic. So Eric Conover, to the people who don't know, is a actually fairly large YouTuber. He has almost 3 million subscribers, and he would just go to New York City and I think a couple other places like London or Chicago or whatever other fucking big city in the world and show off these expensive apartments and condos or whatever. It's like lifestyles of the rich and famous bullshit, but on YouTube.
Okay. I can see as fluff, background video why someone would watch that from your description, I guess. Okay.
No, totally. And his content wasn't great as you could imagine. It was actually pretty well made. It had pretty high production values, but of course not very interesting content. But I hadn't seen his videos in a while because he used to be recommended on my fucking YouTube shorts all the time. I don't know how that works. I think it's just the algorithm. I wasn't searching out this content.
No, it's similar to a TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but I think it's similar to the TikTok and Instagram Shorts algorithm where it's kind of casts a broad net. Whereas your YouTube videos algorithm is pretty refined to you. The shorts kind of just casts a broad net and pushes shit at you.
No, absolutely. And you may be wondering why I think this is cringe, other than the fact that it is kind of cringy content by itself. Well, dear viewers, this, once again, I would say fairly famous YouTuber just almost murdered a cop.
Is that cringe or?
I don't think it's necessarily cringe, but the way he did it was really cringe. So he was going to, I believe, New Hampshire. I think he lives in Massachusetts or Connecticut or something like that. And he was going up to New Hampshire to vacation with his dad to smoke weed. That was his main reason to go to fucking New Hampshire, of course. And he got pulled over. There was an altercation of some sorts. The officer was like, "Hey, have you drank tonight?" And he's like, "No." And then he I'm not sure what the exact story is because details are kind of hard to parse, but he either backed up or just started just slamming the gas and knocked a cop 40 feet away from him.
She just was like, "I gotta go."
He's like, "Well, I gotta go. I won't get caught for a DUI." So now he's being charged with first-degree attempted murder of a police officer.
That's awesome because it's total panic response, right? Cop pulls him over, presumably gets his ID because that's usually the first thing they do, right? They get your license, registration, says, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm going to go smoke weed with my dad," which I guess is kind of based. The kind of dudes rock, right? As an adult man going over to my dad's to roll a J. But absolute panic response. "I'm not drinking," floors it. What was he gonna do then?
Yeah, it wasn't really very well thought out. And even funnier, Brian, at his arraignment, he was literally like, "I did not do this. Also, please subscribe to my YouTube channel."
Oh, I love that. This guy rules. No.
No, I'm dead serious.
Respect the hustle.
He's like, "That's totally not me. It's not me at all. I'm a great guy. Also subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll get a real idea of who I really am."
If you ever need a reminder of the kind of weird content dystopia that we all live in, think about the number of people who during an arraignment or an arrest or some other, fairly serious legal crisis have said, "Subscribe to my YouTube. Follow me on Instagram."
Oh my God, Brian. I found the actual quote here. I'm going through a couple articles here because I couldn't find quite the quote, but get ready for this. He says, and I'm not bullshitting you, this is literally what he said. He said, I am starting a podcast as an act of service. I actually really reflect and think about it. This podcast is so important to me because it is literally the first time in a decade of creating content online that I'm making something from conscious intent rather than compulsion. He said that at his arraignment.
Yes, same. Me too,
King,
dude.
go off, King, at your arraignment. That's awesome.
Ooh, how old is this guy?
He is 35 years old, so he is perfect elder cringe millennial.
This looked like your honor to know that I am making a podcast.
Yeah, Your Honor, I did not murder that cop. Also, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and listen to my podcast. So needless to say, I found the perfect article for our podcast, I'm pretty sure.
God. I have to subscribe to this guy's channel now.
Yeah, really? I mean, would you believe that his content has gotten... He's a little bit behind recently. He hasn't posted in a while. Would you believe that?
He'll get back on the horse. It's just like being so such an egoist about, your art, your content creation. And it's this fucking pablum, this shit, just total fucking
air conditioning swap.
Yeah.
So yeah, Eric Conover, you are definitely our cringe millennial, but you know what? Good luck to you. You're facing attempted murder of a cop. Good luck. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean, for a number of reasons, I think we are forced to give him our technical support, even though on a spiritual level, I do not think I like this guy.
No, but he did hit a cop going 55 miles an hour.
And he defended himself by saying, I'm starting a podcast.
Yeah. Oh, God damn it. Incredible. And we will 100% follow up with Eric Conover when he is inevitably found guilty. There's no way he'll be found not guilty. There's no way.
Hell, I think we're going to kick out Luigi's fund so that we can start signal boosting this guy's legal fund.
Yeah.
Sorry, Luigi. We don't care about you anymore. We're not interested anymore.
Yeah, friendship with Luigi ended. We are now friends with Eric Conover.
They're doing the same pitch. This is our guy. He's absolutely guilty without beyond a reasonable doubt. No hard evidence linking him to the incident. This is the first real act of civil disobedience that's happened in a long time, and we all need to band together behind Mr. Conover.
That's the thing. They're targeting Luigi because he's a rich, hot guy, and they're targeting Eric Conover because he is a rich, mildly attractive guy.
Yeah, pretty soon it's going to trickle down to us, Taylor.
Exactly. First they came for
Where does it end?
Marginally to hot, attractive people, and I said nothing because I wasn't rich or hot. That's like a poem about communism in Nazi Germany. Oh, God. But speaking of people who absolutely would be victims in Nazi Germany, I think that leads perfectly into our review this week. So, once again, we're going to be talking about the album Homesick by Day to Remember. This album came out in 2009. It was performed once again by the band A Day to Remember. And the personnel includes Jeremy McKinnon, otherwise known as the guy who's probably most famous for being on that episode of Pawn Stars. Did you watch that clip, Brian?
I did not. I have seen more Pawn Stars than I would like to admit.
And then Alex Shelnut on drums, Neil Westfall on rhythm guitar, Joshua Woodward on bass, who, would you believe it, Brian? He had a grooming allegation against him. Would you believe a member of a pop-punk band?
A guy in a pop-punk band? A metalcore pop-punk hybrid band.
Also, this one was totally under the radar, but it's oh yeah, Joshua Woodward, he has a grooming allegation. Oh, also, by the way, he accidentally killed somebody in a car accident, but never mind, he was the grooming thing. And I'm like, wait, you just glossed over the fact he killed somebody in an auto accident.
Well, the grooming thing is on brand, so we're going to run with it. The auto accident thing is a little iffier.
Yeah, I don't really know, but it was something along the lines of they said the grooming thing, and then I swear to God, it was under their breath, oh, we also accidentally killed somebody. But yeah, the grooming thing.
That's awesome.
It was wild. I'm they just dropped that. They're oh yeah, he's leaving due to the grooming, but also he killed somebody accidentally. I'm wait, what the fuck?
Pop punk. We love it.
No, we fucking love pop punk. And the last member on this album is Tom Denny on lead guitar, and this was his last album. Now, Tom Denny is very much a Matt Sharp-like figure for Day to Remember. Talk about once again how, or, James Iha, as you mentioned on Smashing Pumpkins, the second that he left, you could just feel it in the band. The energy
he's
totally
not
shifted.
People like that, I would also say that James Iha, great example. Not necessarily the most visible member of a band. You maybe kind of take them for granted, but then when they leave, the sound is fundamentally different.
Absolutely. And Tom Denny was 100% that member for A Day to Remember. And then this album was produced by Chad Gilbert of Newfound Glory, Adam Duchkowitz of Killswitch Engage, and Andrew Wade. And it was released on Victory Records. Now, we will talk about Victory Records later because this album and this band is very, very important for the downfall of Victory Records. Like, undeniably, A Day to Remember is instrumental in killing Victory Records. And we see that as a good thing, to be very clear.
Yeah, Victory Records, my primary interest in this album, to be clear, is its history in the story of kind of millennial hardcore and hardcore adjacent music and Victory Records. Victory Records put out a lot of music I like and a lot of music I do not, but inarguably probably the most influential on a mainstream level hardcore adjacent label of all time. Even still, I would say. And a long and winding history of abusive and just plain shady business tactics. Tony's a psycho. He's a weird guy.
No, totally. So yeah, Rested Piss, Victory Records. Obviously, we love all the not all the bands, but the bands that we loved on Victory Records, like we hope for them the best, but Victory Records themselves can go fuck themselves.
Well, so the big innovation of Victory Records was, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, they do go back to like the 80s hardcore scene. The big innovation of that is people that were around hardcore, not the OG hardcore punk scene, but pretty close to ground level, 88, 89, who are seeing it grow and going, oh, this is actually like a marketable demographic now, and have the foresight to make a record label that specializes at the beginning in hardcore, that is not driven by ideology and is not driven by a desire of a band to put out their own music or the music of their friends or to prop up a hardcore philosophy, but to literally be like, oh, hardcore is a way to make bank. They were so ahead of the curve on that.
No, absolutely. 100%. And yeah, I can't wait till we talk about the A Day to Remember Victory Records lawsuit because it's fucking hilarious. And the album is 40 minutes and 37 seconds long. It was certified gold in the US in 2016 and silver in the UK in 2015. And on Amazon has a 4.8 out of 5, and on Rate Your Music it has a 3.28 out of 5, which I was kind of surprised it was so low on Rate Your Music because we'll certainly get into it on the track listing. But when it comes to like pop punk and like metalcore from the late 2000s, this is like pretty much a universally beloved album. Like, I went on so many forums and I could find almost no dissent on how much people loved this album.
And this is interesting for me because, so I had heard some songs off this album before. I listened to a good amount of pop punk in the late 2000s and early 2010s. I would not say it was ever my preferred genre, but I was more than a little open to it. So there was a period of time when I was listening to the Wonder Years, especially listening to like a little bit of Man Overboard, although I never really liked them. And this band would like come up in that rotation. This is a pop punk revival thing. And even at the time, I don't think it was quite for me, and I couldn't really articulate why it wasn't then. I think I've figured it out now. But yeah, when you look at pop punk, specifically, this is, I guess, what we'd call, you probably wouldn't call it pop punk revival now, because now this album is old. But at the time, this was like people that were into like the defend pop punk thing. They were so down with this album.
No, absolutely, 100%. Like, this was, I guess, talk about defend pop punk, which was, like a 4chan thing into a, Twitter thing and like Tumblr thing or whatever. But like, this band really was like your coworker core level of that defend pop punk thing. Like, if you had like a metal coworker, they probably loved this band and this album, which, and to be fair, I do love this album, to be very clear, but this is very like metal coworker core for sure.
Well, listeners will remember our Sempiternal episode, and I listened to this album a lot, and I decided I was going to take a different approach than I did when we reviewed Sempiternal. Firstly, because they're vastly different albums in a number of ways. But secondly, because I do have a bit of a connection to this, broadly speaking, this genre of music, even though I didn't care for this album. But one of the things I was thinking about was, in the Sempiternal episode, I said I don't understand this particular mix of like aggro and melody, right? A Day to Remember kind of do it in a different way, but there's something about the mix of kind of metallic, aggressive guitars, the harsh metalcore vocals, and then like the really sugary sweet melody. People ate that shit up in the early 2000s. I think maybe it hasn't aged well for people, and I remember at the time I always felt confused by it, but people love that. There's a type of person who their lizard brain responds so well to a mix of like sugary sweet harmonies and then like metalcore vocals.
No, and I would honestly say for the most part, that's kind of the like more mainstream version of metal. Like that's pretty much the thing that is still interesting to people. Like even though of course we talk shit about Sleep Token, that's basically what Sleep Token does.
Absolutely, especially early on. Sleep Token, as far as I understand, now they might not even be doing that screaming anymore, but early on, that is absolutely what they were. This also is interesting when you slot it into the history of like metalcore and post-hardcore, because it almost serves as a perfect illustration of how the scene, quote unquote, and Victory Records and their roster would have evolved. And that by the end of like their time at Relevance, this was like their biggest band or one of their biggest band, which is still pretty firmly rooted in hardcore, but it's so different. It's so different from like Integrity or One Life Crew or whatever the term metalcore would have meant. But it also like you can't take it out of that. The metal element in this, to me, it sounds really awkward much of the time, but it's so rooted in that. You could never say these guys aren't into metal or that they're like posers. They've clearly spent their life around that culture.
No, absolutely. But you know what, Brian? Speaking of posers, actually our second review is relevant to that exact statement, but I'll save that for just a moment because I do want to highlight some Amazon reviews. Now, the Amazon reviews, there weren't that many good ones, I'm going to be honest. Most of them were basically just talking about a shitty, either more delivery of the vinyl pressing versus the quality of it. So there weren't that many great reviews, but I did find a couple. So I wanted to highlight both of those. So our first review here from Amazon customer gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, "It's amazing, y'all." And when I think of y'all, I just think of that like a DSA person with like fucking noodle arms going, "Y'all." Yeah, the body of the review says, "Bought this for my husband who's deployed, and I couldn't wait to listen to it. It's amazing, y'all." And I also want to be clear, this woman was absolutely cheating on her husband.
My pop punk deployed husband.
Yes, exactly. I'm cheating
on him. He's on deployment defending pop punk.
Yeah! And then our next review here, and our last review here, I should say, is from somebody who's definitely defending something, if you know what I mean. So their username is Donovan, or either Donovan Fire or Donovan on Fire. There we are. Gives us 2 stars.
It's an Alexis on Fire reference, right? It's gotta be.
Oh, 100%. And the head of the review says, "A novelty act that will eventually die out. And considering that A Day to Remember are one of the most beloved pop punk bands and one of the most beloved like metal to metal adjacent acts currently touring, that clearly didn't happen. But hey, whatever." And the body of the review says, "Being a fan of post-hardcore," which, by the way, you know, Alexis on Fire reference, he means like swoopy hair, like fucking girl post-hardcore. You know that for a fact.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess that's 20, 25 years on now. That's as much a thing as anything. It is funny to be into Alexis on Fire and then have really strong opinions about posers.
It's so funny. "I am continuously disappointed by bands that falsely ape the sing/scream formula. A Day to Remember is one of those bands. Instead of creating their own sound, they take the extreme difference of pop music and heavy music and try to mesh them together. It's obvious they want to appeal to both pop punk fans and hardcore fans, but they fail to grab either side with their album Homesick." Well, it's actually not true because I found that both those fan bases generally tend to give A Day to Remember a lot of credit, so I don't know about that.
Can I say, obviously this person's prediction is wrong. I basically agree with this review so far.
Oh boy.
This is basically how I feel about this album.
All right, let's see if you keep agreeing. "There's a fine line in creating good songs that traverse the musical spectrum of nice and harsh sounds and emotions, but A Day to Remember don't know how to create these. They're not the worst band in the world, but it's apparent that if they chose a single type of sound, they'd be a lot better for it. Leave the sing/scream sound to musicians better suited to its intricate song structuring. Posers!" And that's the end of the review.
The poser thing is funny to me. Again, for the most part, I don't have a lot of huge disagreements with this reviewer, but it is funny to be talking about like posers when you are really into like Alexis on Fire, or like this guy probably listens to Aiden or something, which like fine, whatever. I also would rather listen to Alexis on Fire than A Day to Remember, but it's not like one of those bands is so much realer than the other or whatever in terms of hardcoreness.
I mean, that's the thing is that, you know, today's gatekeepers are yesterday's posers. Like Alexis on Fire back in like 5 years before this album was like, oh yeah, those guys are like poser ass bullshit. And then 5 years later, they're like, A Day to Remember are poser ass bullshit.
Exactly. I do think, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that this album is so beloved. I remember feeling when I would, because I would, like I said, I was listening to a lot of kind of contemporary or somewhat old pop punk stuff in the early 2010s, and this album would get recommended to me, and I'd listen to a few songs, and I don't think I had basically the feeling I had now, where I was like, okay, I get it. And I think my feeling is that even in pop punk, when they go sugary, they go very sugary. And I think a lot of people, even within within kind of the post-hardcore scene really like that, because it can be really, it's like the sugar rush of pop music, right? It's like really anthemic, and it's really soaring, and it's really beautiful. And I think that A Day to Remember really recognized the inherent power in like having a big pop chorus. And this person, it's interesting that he thinks that that is the more engaging part, because for me, whenever they go into like a metalcore part, which also I don't think are like great, but for me it's like, oh, finally there's like some fucking chugging happening here.
No, absolutely. And, we talked about the pop sensibilities, right? Like, they initially got famous even before this album came out for their pop covers, because they would cover, like, Kelly Clarkson songs or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
Like, that's what they
They
got
were on
famous
Punk
for
Goes
originally.
Pop too or something, right?
Yeah, that was originally, like, part of their big breakout. Of course, along with this album, too, but that was a big part of it. So, but yeah,
Those
they've
albums
talked.
are a nightmare.
They are, and we will certainly talk about them in depth more at some point on this show. But we will save our thoughts for those, because some of those, especially like was it Punk Goes Crunk? Like, oh boy, those are rough. Some rough albums. But we keep talking about the track listing here, so let's get into it. So the first song on here is "Downfall of Us All," which was the second single off this album, and the lyrics are mostly about the stress and pressure that comes from touring and songwriting. It's a pretty worn subject, especially for this band on this album, for sure. But this is the first song that incorporates those elements. The music video is pretty good. Did you watch the music video for this?
I did not.
I won't get into depth of it, but it's basically like stoner comedy style fucking music video. It's enjoyable. It takes place in like a skate park and stuff. It's very pop punk. It's very pop.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds actually like the solid pop punk vibe that is gonna go over well and will probably work.
No, it totally does. Yeah, very enjoyable video for sure. And other than that, I don't really have too much to say about the song, other than the fact that it's obviously one of their biggest songs. But in general, I would say this is a really good first track for this album, because it really does set the tone for most of the rest of the album, I would say.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo that. This is one of the tracks that I had been aware of and heard just kind of around my sphere during the time that I had been listening to more pop punk. So I did know this track already. Listening to it in the context of the album, the big thing that sticks out to me is it centers around these big chugga 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 riffs, which were not super original by the time this album came out, but still were pretty eyebrow raising in pop punk, I'd say. These kind of chuggy, almost thrash metal-y or nu metal-y guitars. And it is jarring, for me in a negative way, but for a lot of people probably in a good way, to hear these big chugging guitars lead into these really sincere, kind of heartfelt vocals. Again, I know that's a thing that a lot of people really respond to. In a live setting, I know people like to sing along with those parts. For me, there's always something about, this band is a really good example of it, but there are other bands that do this. The mixing of sort of like a hardcore affect, like hardcore stage presence and stage mannerisms, with like the kind of like lighter, kind of airy, kind of nasally pop punk vocals. It's always funny to me. Even when it's good, it's funny to me. And I do think this is a great lead-in for the album. One of the best tracks on it. It's, like I said, big, memorable chugging guitars, big anthemic chorus. One thing that sticks out to me throughout this album, there was no point in the album where I didn't think this, is that on Fall Out Boy's 2001 album, Take This to Your Grave, there's a song called Saturday. And towards the end of that song, there's a big anthemic kind of breakdown part that's very melodic. And then Pete Wentz shows up and starts doing like metalcore vocals. And it's, if you don't know about Pete Wentz and the members of Fall Out Boy's history in hardcore, it would seem really jarring, right? And it always seemed to me, even as someone who kind of likes that album, it like very obvious that Pete is shoehorning in his hardcore vocals just to remind everyone that he used to be in tough guy bands, right? And there is not a moment on this album that does not sound like that moment on the Fall Out Boy album to me.
No, that's totally fucking fair. Absolutely. That's fucking hilarious. And next song on here is My Life for Hire. And this song is, once again talked about the, stresses of touring and all that. And this one is really about, I guess, people in their either hometown or music scene or whoever, telling them that they shouldn't really mix genres or try to stick to something more singular, something that's more, well-tread. And they were just like, no, we're not going to fucking do that. We're going to do what we want to, listen to and we want to do. Because, like, you were talking about nu metal just a moment ago, right? Like, this band were like, well, we like pop punk. We like metalcore. We like, talk about like beat down hardcore. And it's like, what if we all like bring all these subgenres together and try to mix them together like a fucking smoothie or something? We'll see if it works. And, even though obviously I know, Brian, you're not the biggest fan of this band, but once again, this hit for a lot of fucking people for sure. Like,
yeah, no,
this is a absolutely beloved album in general. And they were eventually proven right, because once again, they are still a big touring act.
Yeah, they are still a band that in kind of the metal sphere, like people talk about this band. People are excited when they roll through town. I still know when they come around Portland, people I know are talking about it. So this track features the first, quote unquote, what I consider the first heavy segment, which is towards the end of this song. There's kind of a buck wild, distorted kind of pitch harmonic, kind of chugging breakout thing with these For a Day to Remember, very harsh vocals. Pretty cool, pretty fun. Again, not really for me, but it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, I bet if you're into this band and you're seeing them live, this section of the song probably fucking goes, right? The other thing is, there are moments on this album that I enjoy, particularly when I think the heaviness comes together and works really organically. This song, up until this point, for me, is so poppy that when it breaks into this heavy kind of, it's not even metalcore influence. It is like a metalcore segment of the song. It is a little jarring for me. And there's a part of me that's like, wishes, I guess, that it had been peppered throughout the song a little bit more, because it does kind of transition from like a pop punk song to a metalcore song. But again, I think if you were seeing this band live, I bet that abrupt transition probably fucking goes.
No, absolutely, yeah. And we will certainly get to a certain segment of a certain song later, but a lot of the, metal and, hardcore and metalcore components and then the call-outs, like, oh, they're still memes to this day. Like, I made the joke about disrespect your surroundings, but that is a reference I still see all the time on forums, which is hilarious.
One of the thoughts I had listening to this is part of the thing with pop punk. I think that, obviously it's musically more accessible than like traditional punk or like traditional hardcore or whatever. But I think even more than that, it's so relatable to a broad group of kids. Obviously there are hardcore guys who would listen to these lyrics, which are very earnest and very sincere and very statement of purpose and about striking out on your own, and they'd relate to them. But there's also, you'd be like a nerdy like kid in like your sophomore year and relate to these just as much. Like there isn't the same sort of alienation as there might be if you're listening to like a band like fucking Ramallah, and you're like, well, what does this have to do with my life? And those big anthemic choruses and then these big fucking like metal influenced breakdowns, I can see like that's what the defend pop punk thing is, right? It's this big community of people who are like, this is for us, and they're very proud of that, even though I wouldn't necessarily be that proud of that because the music a lot of the time isn't that good.
No, it's totally fair. And then the next track on here is I'm Made of Wax, Larry, What Are You Made Of? Featuring Mike Hranica of Devil Wears Prada. And the title of this is apparently referencing the movie Night at the Museum. And there's a lot of those like 2000s metalcore and like pop punk like song titles on here. That was just what was popular at the time.
A song title that is 3 sentences. You see that going all the way back to like bands like Coalesce and things. That's a big tradition. First in metalcore, made its way into pop punk, probably in large part because of like Pete Wentz and Fall Out Boy. And then it's just, I hate titles like that. I actually used to write songs with titles like that. So when I say I hate them, a lot of that's because I'm like, boy, that's embarrassing. This is the only A Day to Remember song before this week when I listened to this album that I knew. Like I remembered this song. I could have hummed it for you. This to me is A Day to Remember.
Really interesting. This is because this wasn't a single, so I'm surprised this was the one you had heard of the most.
Yeah, this is the song that people would play when we were hanging out. This is the song that would always get pushed to me on Wonder Years radio. If anyone remembers the days of Pandora, I had a Wonder Years station. I was always trying to get me to listen to A Day to Remember, and this was always the song that it pushed at me.
God, that's fucking awesome. And that makes sense though, I guess, because this feature is one of the harder vocalists on this album. Because like Devil Wears Prada isn't like the most like fucking like, rip off your dick kind of fucking metal band ever. But
they're metalcore.
More, yeah, and definitely sounds harder than most of A Day to Remember, I will say that.
Yeah, well, and my thing with this song, and there's a few other moments like this, and I don't necessarily think A Day to Remember are going for this. I think it's just sort of part of making pop punk. This song is a little bit epitaphy, right? It's a little bit skate punk or like No Effects or something. Not all the way there, but it's kind of closer there. It's a little more mid-tempo. It's a little snottier on the chorus, I would say for me, this track largely works for me in a way that the previous two don't. Like it comes together, I think. And like I said, part of that is because it's a little closer to skate punk, so it's maybe a little bit more something that I relate to. I also just think it has like a big chorus. I mean, every song on this album has a big chorus, but this seems like it would be really fun to sing along to live.
No, absolutely, yeah. And another song that leads right into that is New Jersey Legion Iced Tea, which is actually the first single off this album, interestingly enough. And the song, talk about, once again, pop punk tropes. This is a song about hanging out with your friends and going to local shows together, which, who doesn't love that? Shit rocks. Folks, we love our friends. Folks, we love live shows. We love going to see live shows. Some people say it's the best thing. Everybody's saying it's the best thing. We love it.
You love hanging out with your friends. You love going to shows. You love going to the Waffle House afterwards and buying Xanax from one of your friends.
Exactly. You love eating pizza with your friends.
Well, you love eating frozen pizza, if you can. I had a thought. There are, listeners will know, part of the way that I kind of evaluate albums is I look at threads through them and kind of potential influences I pick up on, or think I pick up on. I could be wrong. Taylor, do you feel like there's a lot of Tom DeLonge energy kind of looming over A Day to Remember? Not Blink-182 overall, but specifically Tom. Like the big kind of like spacey guitars that he was doing later on, and the kind of like anthemic choruses. Do you kind of know do you know what I mean? Like when you think of like the later Blink song, like Stay Together for the Kids or something, or even his stuff with that weird band Angels and Airwaves. He's kind of trying to do art rock. There's these really echoey kind of like U2 guitars. There's a lot of that on this track to me.
No, I 100% agree with that. 100%.
This, spacey, almost adult contemporary guitar thing. In my notes, I said the Defend Pop Punk crowd must go nuts for this. And I wrote down, this is the life we chose. They can never take that from me, or this from me. Because I'm sorry, I think it's very funny. And I'm trying not to be a jerk. It is very funny to make this type of music and then be like, this is the life I chose. You can't take this from me. It's like, it's pop punk. No one's trying to take it from you.
But that's the thing, Brian, they're from, like, buttfuck nowhere, Florida. Like, that is the pop punk, you can't take this away from me, defend pop punk homeland, is buttfuck nowhere, Florida.
Yeah, it was them and a bunch of fucking death metal bands.
Yes. All right, and the next song on here is the one I mentioned about Disrespect Your Surroundings earlier. So this is Mr. Highway's Thinking About the End. Now, the title is a reference to The Good Son, the Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood movie, I believe. And this song's, the lyrics are about, people trying to belittle your accomplishments, I believe, as we mentioned, I believe on the second or third song. Once again, very well-worn pop-punk lyrics, once again, combined with metalcore and hardcore style instrumentation a lot of the time, but not all the time. So I think it's really interesting to hear that kind of like fucking lyrical style with these kind of instrumentations is really hilarious. And then, of course, once again, the breakdown and the call out is hilarious. Disrespect Your Surroundings is so funny. I love it.
It's one of those things, too, where, like, I don't know enough about this band to know what irony level they're working on. To me, this band seems to have inherited the thing from metalcore, where they seem to take themselves pretty seriously, at least in their songs. I'm not accusing them of that in their life. And so I hear Disrespect Your Surroundings, and I imagine it's this really angsty, dumb statement of purpose. But it is possible that they knew it was funny, and it was like a tongue-in-cheek way to say, like, tear up the pit.
Now, I will say, as somebody who's not like, I wouldn't say I'm a giant, like, super fan of A Day to Remember. I would say I am a fan, though. Like, I like basically everything they released outside of their, like, Imagine Dragons album that came out a few years ago. I was not a fan of, like, the two songs I heard from that. I'm like, this is not what A Day to Remember should be. And when I say Imagine Dragons style, I mean, they literally sound like Imagine Dragons. That is not an exaggeration.
Maybe that's just the singles,
It might be, but I was like, oh boy, I am not listening to this. But I will say, especially based on their music videos and their overall like aesthetic and what they, do in interviews and what they say, I think they are probably like 95% tongue-in-cheek self-aware, I would say.
Okay, cool. And that's the thing in like pop punk. That's why I could see it going either way. Because there is lyrically some of the posturing of like hardcore guys. They're like, nobody understands me and I'm striking out on my own and I'm keeping it real. But there's also like, it's, some cutesy pop punk stuff. So I was like, I could see this going either way. Either way, it is clearly an iconic and memorable line. It stuck with me. I was thinking about Disrespect Your Surroundings all week, whether I wanted to or not.
Now, I will say, though, too, that the music video, and this was not for this album, I believe this is the album after this, but they have a song called Second Sucks, which is a, like, explicit, like, arcade reference, and the music video features Chris Kirkpatrick of NSYNC in it, so, like, they're pretty self-aware of their own goofiness, I will say.
That's, like, a good vibe for your pop-punk band's music video, I'd say.
No, absolutely. And that is probably my favorite A Day to Remember music video. It's also, the music video is actually longer than the song, which is also really funny. So they're clearly aware. They have this like awesome, like 3-minute long sequence that once again features Chris Kirkpatrick for some reason from NSYNC in it. And then the song lasts like 2 minutes. So like they clearly know what kind of audience they're going after, I will say. And then, well, speaking of, I think that actually leads perfectly into our next song here, which is Have Faith in Me. Talk about once again the kind of audience they know they have. And this was the third single off the album. And actually technically the last single, but we'll get into what kind of is a single at the very end here. But this song is very much about, once again, having trust, having faith, the people in your life, loving you and all these things. Once again, very well-worn pop punk like lyricism here. And this is definitely one of the softer songs on the album too, for sure.
Yeah. This is another one I have in my notes where I feel like there's some big Tom DeLonge vibes. I don't know that that's who they're thinking of, but that's, for me, if you've ever heard his post-Blink band, Angels and Airwaves, or if you've heard the last Blink-182 album that Tom DeLonge was on, it's full of these big anthemic, kind of has the texture of pop punk, but it's clearly not. It's almost more, and I don't mean this derisively, but it's almost more maybe like Coldplay with like pop punk kind of guitar tones and things, kind of big and anthemic and kind of going for something like U2. This is a track that made me think that again. There's clearly one of the things that A Day to Remember keep in their pocket are these gentle but big, bombastic, anthemic moments.
Yes, 100%. This is, and I can see why this was definitely a single, because the first two singles are songs that have, once again, metalcore and more pop punk elements, whereas this one is, very much, could appeal very much to even more normies than this band generally appeals to. And I'm not even saying that in a bad way. Once again, I have definitely reconciled my feelings on quote unquote normies and like normie this and that, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not even saying that's from, once again, like a 4chan perspective, but just for lack of a better word, I'm going to call them normies.
Just is what it is, yeah.
Exactly. But I can see why this was definitely a single. I wouldn't say this is my favorite song in the album, but I do like this one quite a bit as well. I think it flexes Jeremy's talent, natural talent as a vocalist, that he's able to go from those extremes of softness to, once again, more of like a hardcore metalcore style vocalist. Even though I wouldn't say he's my favorite metalcore vocalist either, but he still has quite a wide array of lyrical talents here.
I think one of the things that is pretty undeniable as I listen to this is he clearly is someone he is a metalcore vocalist. It's not like he's a pop punk guy that was like, I'm going to try screaming. He has the diction down. He has the control of his voice. Probably was in like straight up metalcore bands, I would assume, before he was in A Day to Remember.
Yes, I believe so. I did a little bit of research at one point about him, and he was definitely more the metalcore and hardcore side from what I remember. Like, he would go to local shows, like hardcore shows and shit when he was a kid and stuff like that, so that would make sense. And then, well, speaking of, that actually leads perfectly into our next one as well. So, next one here is Welcome to the Family, and this one features the hardest, by far, featuring vocalist here, which is Vincent of Acacia Strain. Now, do you like Acacia Strain, Brian, or are you familiar with Acacia Strain?
I appreciate Acacia Strain. They aren't a band that I put on, but I've listened to them and I like them pretty well. I think you and I used to listen to a little bit of Acacia Strain when we lived together.
Yes, and I
think that was a thing
them.
that we would go on these tangents where we'd start talking about metalcore and we'd put on different things on YouTube, and I think that was an artist that at least once or twice we put on and talked about as we listened to. I think they're fine.
Yeah, they're fine. I think Vincent is one of the best metalcore/deathcore vocalists of the 2000s. Like, personally, I think he is just fantastic at that just nasty screaming vocal style. Like, he's one of the best in my opinion, easily. Whereas, some others in that genre, like, as we covered in the Suicide Silence one with like Mitch Lucker and stuff, where his is a little goofy, almost sounds like, Donald Duck at some point.
Yeah.
But like, he was just like, his screaming style is just disgusting. Like, hearing it, I'm gonna be honest.
This is one of my favorite tracks on this album because it just goes farther in on the heaviness. And it's not that everything I like is so heavier that I'm such a like big hardcore guy. I actually love a lot of pop music and a lot of like singer-songwriter stuff, but trying not to harp on it. I think a thing that I find distracting is trying to mix the, like, for lack of a better word, the kind of the wimpiness with the toughness. And I'm not using either of those words derisively, but that's kind of what it is, it sometimes can feel distracting to me. So these tracks that I think go a little more all in on the heavy side, it's a little easier for me to sink my teeth into. Also, I actually didn't know that I was like, recognized that this wasn't the vocalist that we'd been hearing the whole time. I didn't realize it was the guy from Acacia Strain, and I was like, oh, the vocals on here are kind of amping up.
Yeah, right. And also, I actually listened to a Day to Remember song just before we started recording that I had not heard of. And would you believe it, Brian? It's basically a Motorhead song, or like what a Day to Remember's equivalent of a Motorhead song would be.
That makes sense. That's awesome. I mean, one of my big thoughts listening to this album throughout that kept coming back to me during the heavier segments, like repeatedly, I kept thinking is, Taylor, are you familiar with the band Shai Hulud?
Yes, I do like Shai Hulud.
Yeah. So I get in the heavy segments of this album, big Shai Hulud vibes in that. So for any listeners that don't know, Shai Hulud are, I would say, they're part of what I consider like the golden age of metalcore, like that late 90s, early 2000s thing, where it's still kind of coming out of like hardcore, coming a little bit out of emo, but it kind of, Converge, Shai Hulud, Cave In, Kaless, all these bands. Like that for me is like peak metalcore. Shai Hulud's big innovation, I would say, was being metalcore and being very technical and peppering in just a little bit of like skate punk melody, because members of Shai Hulud, of course, later went on to join Newfound Glory, so that makes sense. But this track in particular, but throughout the heavy moments, I get big Shai Hulud influences.
Yes, and of course you mentioned Newfound Glory. One of the members of Newfound Glory produced this album, so that makes a lot of sense.
I don't know if it was one of the members that was in Shai Hulud, but it wouldn't surprise me.
No, absolutely. And then the next track on here is Homesick, the title track. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a controversial opinion to you, Brian, but I think this is easily my favorite song in the album. Like, the lyrics to me speak the most to me out of basically any of the songs on this album, because like, having traveled, once again around the world, and I'm continuing to travel much more, like, sometimes I do think like, this is cool seeing a new thing, but I also do kind of miss Wisconsin sometimes. And this song is essentially about being literally homesick for your friends and family and what you're familiar with, and in a way that's basically like, I'm doing this thing that I want to do for myself. I'm trying to find self-actualization, which is being in this band and touring and hanging out with my friends and, meeting new people and all these things. But I will be back, I promise. Just hold it down for me, please. And I feel that in a lot of ways, especially the older I get and the more I go around the world. So this one is definitely my favorite on the album, I would say.
This is one of the tracks I would say that works better for me. For me, it's not so much because of any lyrical resonance, but musically, for me, it kind of harkens back almost to a little bit of like a cleaner kind of 90s punk thing. It's kind of skate punky, kind of like melodic hardcore almost. Like I've said a few times before, this song has like a big, bold chorus. And I know that if you're like a Defend Pop Punk crew person and you're at a show and they start singing this chorus, that must just pull you right in. This is one of the tracks on here where it's got a little bit of an epitaph, Fat Wreck kind of vibe, maybe a little akin to like a band like Rise Against or something, or maybe even Pennywise if you want to go even further back. This was one of my favorite tracks on the album, just because I think it sums up, like, of course, the themes of the album really well. It's really big and anthemic, which you usually want your title track to be. They keep it pretty simple musically, and I think it mostly works.
No, absolutely. And then the next song on here is Holding It Down for the Underground. Now, once again, hilarious title of a song. But to be fair, though, I will say the actual subject of this song is maybe the most serious on the entire album. So the song was written during a time when two of Jeremy's family members died, and he wrote it basically as like a cathartic thing. So I do appreciate that. There's obviously a lot of meaning there. But yeah, the song title is very hilarious, I will say.
You can't blame him. That's just the nature of song titles if you were this type of band at the time. I get it. I like this song. There's some cool riffing on the verses. His vocals are a little harder here than on most of the album. Makes sense that this is lyrically a very personal track for him because he is spitting a little harder than he is most of the time here. There's a nice breakdown here that is kind of a vibe, and I mostly am kind of indifferent to this band's breakdowns, but slightly heavier track. They're really pulling out their hardcore and their metal bona fides here. They're kind of showing off to us and letting us know they can do it. Pretty cool guitars on the track. I like it. Again, kind of Shai Hulud light.
No, absolutely. And then the next song on here is You Already Know What You Are, and this is the shortest track in the album. It's like a minute and a half long. And this one's definitely a really good example, once again, of the pop-punk metalcore hybrid. Like, maybe I would say one of the best examples of it, because it literally is like pop-punk 1 second, metalcore 1 second, pop-punk 1 second. It's like, it's almost like an instrumental exercise to a certain extent, I would say.
Yes, this is my favorite track on the album, and I promise it sounds like I'm being like snarky when I say this. Part of that is because it's shorter than the rest of the album, but it's like you said, it works. It's kind of like an instrumental exercise, and it's kind of seems like it's them seeing how far can we push this combination of genres, like to what extreme can we take it. So they're really effectively doing kind of a 1-2 punch here. So it does, you get the big anthemic chorus, which isn't my favorite thing, but I think they do it, pretty well. I think it's engaging and it could be fun. fun. I think when they go into the kind of like retro metalcore thing, it's pretty cool and pretty fun. And it is, like I said, it's a 1-2 punch. You get both the things this band does. They do it exceptionally well on this track, I think, and then they're out. You don't really get a chance for your mind to wander or to be thinking like, oh, are they doing this again? You kind of just get everything that they do pushed right in there.
No, absolutely. And also the lyrics are a fuck the haters song. And Brian, we're both the haters they're criticizing in this song. I think we could both agree. We're just the world's biggest haters.
The thing with being a pop punk revival band, and this is absolutely a conscious thing, you got to talk about your haters because, first of all, of course, there's a whole slew of people that you had to spend your life hearing make fun of you for being into pop punk, from like the jocks, but also to like the real punks and like the people like me who are like these like asinine hipsters who like are looking down on you, right? And the thing with the 90s pop punks is they didn't know they were supposed to be lashing out at those haters, so just kind of they're left defenseless, right? But the defend pop punk guys, they're like, that's it, that's right, we are making pop punk, we are pussies, we are gay.
And also, Brian, eventually all the haters will be our waiters at the table of success. Eric Adams, 2023.
Classic P1 style own.
Well, speaking of owning songs, so the next song on here is the penultimate song, another song about The Weeknd, which I'm sure, Brian, you would have been like, wait, another song about The Weeknd? What is Abel doing?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he had House of Balloons wouldn't come out for another 2 years.
Yeah, once again, this is a song about, once again, the stressors and touring and how it can be addictive, but also obviously, very lonely, and it can obviously be very hard work, but at the same time rewarding. Definitely things we don't know about because we're not a touring podcast act yet, but we will eventually do that someday. We will be the biggest podcasters in the world.
And when we get there, I will have a newfound appreciation for this album. And I'll be like, huh, pretty good track. I mean, like, again, none of this album is like a thing that like I super relate to. One of my big takeaways with this track is big Blink-182 vibes for me. That's kind of, for me, a through line through this is the later Blink-182 and early Angels and Airwaves stuff. But you really get that here. And really good bass on this track. There aren't a lot of moments on this album where the bass stood out to me. But there's some really good bass standout moments here. Some nice little melodies kind of hiding in the background underneath these like layers of guitars, which was nice to see. It kind of gave it was refreshing, I guess.
No, absolutely. And then the final song on here, Brian, and I'm going to guess this was your least favorite song, if it means a lot to you. Now, this is the one that's mostly a, like, acoustic style track, and this is the song that, believe it or not, Brian, this is the most popular Day to Remember song. It didn't start out that way. This was never a single. It later became a big song among fans, and it's basically, like, the fan favorite, and it was the technical last, but it was only a radio single. It was not a physical single. And this song features Sierra Kay, who is a vocalist of a band that I couldn't even find a Wikipedia article for.
This is A Day to Remember's version of Broken by Seether and Amy Lee, basically. Yeah, this probably is my least favorite track, as you predicted, but not to such a degree that I like. There's nothing on this album. I don't have a really strong, I would say, favorite or least favorite on this album. Nothing on this is offensive to me. Even this track, it's kind of like, okay, you're ending with like kind of a little ballad, a duet thing, kind of an obligatory thing you have to do if you're a rock band who's shooting for a level of like mainstream appeal, is you have to do like your soft track. And at the very least, at least they had the sense to put it at the end of the album and not at the middle between these like metalcore influenced and like big anthemic pop punk songs where it would fuck up the rhythm, right?
No, absolutely,
but boy,
yeah.
I don't like this lady's voice, I gotta tell you.
Yeah. Also, to be fair, I actually did find her band is Versa. That's what the band is called. It used to be called Versa Merge, but they're now called Versa. And I will agree, I'm not a big fan of this woman's voice. She was also on a Fueled by Ramen band, Versa was. Would you believe that?
Figures. I mean, every band,
once again.
Every band at this time was either on Victory or Fueled by Ramen.
That is true, yeah. Those were like the two giant, like, quote-unquote alternative or like Warped Tour record labels, for sure. Like 100%. But yeah, no, I will agree. I don't love this woman's vocals. I will say this is actually another one of my favorite tracks in the album. I would say it's probably in like my top 3 or 4. Just because like it is essentially a breakup song. It's also a song, once again, about, fame and, being lonely. But it's essentially a breakup song because at the end, you can tell like whatever this connection that they have that is being, essentially torn apart by fame and touring and all that, it's not going to last. You can clearly tell. Like, that is clearly what the end of the lyrics are.
It's not sustainable.
No. So it is essentially a song about, talk about the pop punk thing, I don't know if necessarily emotionally manipulative, because I don't think he's trying to be emotionally manipulative in the song, but it could be construed that way. Of basically be like, baby, just wait for me, I promise. Things will be so much better when I come back from tour. And she's like, yeah, I just don't know if I can wait that long. Like, that's ultimately what the song's about.
Lord knows, I hate giving any benefit of the doubt to a pop punk guy. I would say, if anything, this shows a certain level of self-awareness. It's like him reflecting on how, as he says, this life he chose that no one can take from him, how it, affects his ability to maintain relationships and how it affects his loved ones, and kind of, reflecting on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And that's the thing, though, is that except for that bassist who groomed somebody and then accidentally killed somebody in the fucking vehicular accident, there are no scandals involving the members of A Day to Remember. So I have to give them credit for that, because these kind of bands, they were all groomers. They were all groomers in every band.
That's a pretty big qualifier, though. No scandals with A Day to Remember, except for the bass player who groomed someone and also killed someone in a car accident.
But Brian, though, as a bassist, I can say nobody cares about the bassist in the band, to be very clear. They're basically dogs. They're pack animals. They're beasts of burden of bands.
Unfortunately, in these bands, the way that mainstream, like, post-hardcore and pop-punk was mixed, that is unfortunately true. The guitars and vocals and drums were so high in the mix. The bass was buried. It sounds like dog shit. I hate the way mainstream rock from the 2000s is mixed.
No, totally. So yeah, they are the beasts of burden of this genre, and especially this era. So like, actually, he is a member that might as well not even have existed. They could like damnatio memoriae or whatever, how they did in Rome, where they're just like cross off their names in history. They could just do that for the bassist.
They just blot him out of the promo materials.
Yeah. All the pictures of him, they just like put like the black circle and like scrape black over his face or some shit. Like, oh, who's that guy? I don't know. Some guy who's a fan. He snuck on the fucking promo picture. Oh, God. But yeah, so that is the review of Homesick. Now, let's get to our final thoughts before we get to our pluggables. So I love this album. I think it's great. I didn't have too much to say about a lot of the tracks, because I think, in general, I think it fits more as an album than necessarily individual tracks in a lot of these tracks. But I would say I at least like all these tracks. And I'm not a big fan of pop punk. You know that about me, Brian. I am not a pop punk defender. I was never about, say pop punk, defend pop punk. I was always like, pop punk sucks shit. But this is one of the few bands that has pop punk elements that I will genuinely defend. And, once again, outside of They Who Shall Not Be Named, I think all the members of this band have something to offer, and it seems like they are mostly chill guys overall, so I will give them credit for that.
It's interesting. Our opinions kind of mirror each other on this album, but I don't really like this album. And the thing is, I, in my musical history, would say have been more into pop punk at various points than you are. For me, a thing I absolutely agree with is it's very cohesive. Like, it very much is an album. For the same reason, it's hard for me to find individual things to say about each track. There's a very distinct sound on this that's very identifiable as this band. Like I said, pretty much every moment of the album reminds me of the screaming part of the song Saturday by Fall Out Boy. So if you like that, and I know a lot of people do, you're gonna love this album. My issue with a lot of pop punk that was being made on this level and in this scene at this point is that sort of, and with metalcore and pop punk, they become so far removed, from like the original punk and from hardcore, but even like by this point, pop punk is pretty far removed, I would say, even from like Dookie by Green Day, that it's kind of become a genre by the late 2000s, especially by the early 2010s. It's become a genre separate from like punk history. It's become like kind of its own thing. I also think that was true by the 2010s of a lot of metalcore, where like metalcore starts out as kind of an experimental and heavier evolution out of hardcore punk. And of course, it very quickly evolves into something separate from that, but it kind of retains those roots. And as time goes on, it becomes separate from that. A Day to Remember, for me, are musically separate from both of those distinct lineages that they combine at the same time. I think if you like pop punk from this era, you'll like this album. I think they do it pretty well. For me, if I was going to recommend a late 2000s pop punk band, it would be The Wonder Years. And even then is a band I don't listen to that much now. I think the big appeal of this band is probably the mix of heaviness on the verses, these heavy chugging guitars, and then these big anthemic kind of heartwarming choruses. And again, a lot of people really like that. I think that compared probably to other bands in kind of the Warped Tour sphere at this time, I probably like this better than most of it. And as we're going to talk about, I can't hate A Day to Remember, because A Day to Remember brought justice to Victory Records, true villains of the hardcore and punk rock scenes for decades.
Yes, and actually, that is a good point because I was almost going to forget about that. So we have to talk about the Victory Records A Day to Remember lawsuit. So thing is that they had A Day to Remember, I believe, had a 5-record contract, which is pretty normal in like record contracts.
Yeah.
But basically, they fucked over A Day to Remember hard, and they owed a lot of royalties. Although not like a crazy amount, but A Day to Remember claimed that they owed $75,000 in royalties. Victory Records basically said, "We're not going to fucking do that. You better give us our 5-record deal and we'll give you your $75,000. That's not a lot of money for 5 records of content. That's like what, $15,000 per band member. That's dog shit. And eventually they filed a lawsuit and they won, and the settlement was $4.02 million. And they won 3 out of the 4 issues in civil court except for the band's masters. But they won $4.02 million
Yeah.
and 3 out of 4 outside of their masters, which is an insane verdict for a band. If this happened to a record label, you know Victory fucked over hard this band.
That's the thing. That's the thing. If I can put on my like punk rock nerd cap for a second here, bands have been trying to strike out against Victory Records for decades at this point, for at least 20 years. Tony Brummel, founder and owner and operator of Victory Records, kind of a visionary within hardcore. He was in the 80s hardcore scene and he was watching all of these changes happen. He was there when like emo starts happening. He's there when crossover starts happening, when hardcore punk bands. So Tony Brummel is seeing all of these things happen. Straight edge, emo. And he's seeing it in the community, not from the outside, but as a young guy in hardcore punk who genuinely likes it, genuinely has done things in the scene, but he's going like, oh, I can fucking make money off of this. It is like the true psycho-capitalist innovation thing brought to hardcore punk, which, you know, on its face should be this communal kind of utopian youth culture thing, right? And he recognizes that. He recognizes the inherent strength in the youth culture appeal of it. And he goes, I can make money off of this. He also sees the changes happening in the genre. So it's not just that he sees the monetary value. He sees how he could be ahead of the curve here. So the first bands on Victory Records are like heavy, tough guy bands. Like I said, One Life Crew, the infamous fucking racist band who are so fucking funny, were on Victory Records in the 90s. You know, we've got, I think, Integrity had a couple records on
Earth Crisis were on Victory.
Earth Crisis, right. But
and Dead Guy?
Dead Guy. Fucking crazy ass bands that are taking hardcore to these progressive places. At the same time he's propping up these bands, he's seeing pop punk happening, and he's seeing how pop punk and hardcore are kind of bubbling next to each other. And he's always ahead of the curve on that. Fucking Thursday are on Victory Records. Like a groundbreaking band in hardcore, whether you think it's for good or for ill. So he's at the forefront of that, and he's fucking making money hand over fist because he's there as the genre of music goes from being this niche underground thing to becoming mainstream. He like there to ride it into the mainstream and fucking over band after band of 18-year-olds with starry eyes for 20 years.
Exactly. And A Day to Remember in Hawthorne Heights killed them.
Yeah. I mean, like, Hawthorne Heights is first, but it's kind of like, I think a big part of that is just that, like, the internet wasn't what it was. So, like, obviously people for years had been, you know, in community, guys in bands and girls in bands and things had been saying, oh, you know, Victory's shady, Tony's a shithead or whatever. The Hawthorne Heights thing happens and it hurts, it wounds them, but does not kill them. The Day to Remember thing happens in, 2009, 2010?
2011.
And it's 2011. Okay, thank you. And it's all online. Like, the information gets, allegedly neither party leaked the information of the lawsuit online. It was public, but starts getting publicized by like alternative press and shit, right? And then everyone knows about it now. This is effectively the end of Victory Records.
Yes, exactly. So we gotta love A Day to Remember, even though, once again, we do not like that Imagine Dragons album or whatever the fuck, because that was like, holy shit, no thanks. But gotta respect A Day to Remember no matter what, because they finally took down Tony. They finally took down this fucking scumbag.
I may have said this story on a recent episode. My favorite Tony Brummel story, I think, is that Chubby Fresh of One Life Crew, racist, pro-Trump, straight edge, fucking Cleveland hardcore band with great riffs, just great riffs, claims that. So what happens is One Life Crew effectively get canceled in the mid-90s. Their racism becomes too flagrant. It becomes too much. They get pulled from Victory Records. They get basically blacklisted from the Cleveland scene, even though they're this highly influential band. Brummel Brummel stops printing their album. Now, the album Crime Ridden Society is still making money. And Tony Brummel makes this big statement, says, I can't support racism. That's not what hardcore's about. That's not what Victory Records is about. Now, Chubby Fresh alleges that while he refused to reissue their album, he was still selling it under the table online over eBay for hundreds of dollars a copy, which I think Chubby Fresh lies constantly, but I absolutely believe Tony Brummel was doing that.
Oh, 100%. I refuse to believe he wasn't doing that.
These two fucking absolute degenerates just going to war with each other.
Oh, it's fantastic. So yes, fuck Victory Records. A Day to Remember. We love you. Brian's favorite band of all time. We're going to make Brian listen to all of A Day to Remember's albums now after this because he's...
The thing is, like, it's a weird thing. It was easier for me to listen to than Sempiternal, but harder for me to talk about. This album, for what it is, like, it's kind of an era and a form of doing this style that doesn't click with me, but it's not, like, bad to me. Like, whereas with Sempiternal, there's stuff on it where I'm like, they're clearly trying this wacky shit, and sometimes I'm like, ooh, what the fuck was that? There isn't anything like that on this album. This makes sense at every moment for me, you know?
No, it's very cohesive, 100%. Like, every song works for the album that it's on, 100%. All right, so that is our review of A Day to Remember. So before we get to the end of our episode, let's get to our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please subscribe and follow us on both of our YouTube and our Spotify channels, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert are creating a fantastic series. And I believe they are shooting more episodes very soon. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, received an update from Scott recently. Lucifer and the Father is a go right now. I don't know to what extent, but I have received notification that the project does have legs now. Continue donating if you're so inclined, because again, this is a pretty ambitious series. I don't know how long they'll be running. I don't know how many episodes they have the funds for, but more Lucifer and the Father is coming. We're really excited to see it. We're going to be in touch, of course, with our friends Scott, Sean, and Robert, and I'm sure that they'll give us lots of information on the forthcoming show, and we should probably talk about the pilot episode eventually.
No, absolutely. So yeah, the show is coming to fruition even more now, and of course, as always, as we've said, you know, if you want to donate to the campaign, just send us an email, send us a YouTube link, etc. Just show us proof that you donate to the campaign, and we will, within reason, of course, match your donation about $20-25, because we want Scott, Sean, and Robert's, you know, dream show to become a reality. And even though it's already on the precipice of more episodes, because they have reached, I believe, a quarter of their goal, but they still need about 75% of that to go. So please donate to the campaign today. And, you know, we made that joke earlier about how we're going to endorse Eric Conover now versus Luigi, but at the moment, we still have to support Luigi because he's just so cool. He's so based. And of course, at the moment, if the trial were to be held today, he would be found not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But of course, his now official Luigi Mangione, the now official Luigi Mangione Defense Fund is active. Been active for a while, but it's now been official for like the last month or so, I want to say. It's now, I believe, at almost $800,000. So people really believe in it. And both Brian and I have donated to it at this point. And we will, within reason, of course, match those donations. Just send us proof on YouTube or on email, etc. And we will match those donations at a reasonable number, like once again, $20-25. But please donate to that.
We say it every week, but you know, of course, this isn't a political show, really, but everything sucks shit so bad. Everything is bad for just normal people. Anything that we can do to unite against like a person that is being propped up as a target by this bullshit system, this fucking oligarchy, this autocracy that we're under, that we can, you know, show some solidarity behind, we have to do it. So please donate, and within reason, Taylor and I, of course, are going to match your donation to give Luigi further support, because while he is innocent, they're going to come for him. They're going to come for him hard. They're fucking over his lawyer real good right now, and we need to be able to combat that.
No, absolutely. And you know what? Once again, talking about people who've been fucked over, but who you should now support. Of course, we now have our Patreon page. So
yes,
please donate to our Patreon. We want your money. We want your donations. We do, of course, have many good perks that we talked about in the last episode. So listen to that episode if you want to hear them again. But we do have good perks for our fans. So please subscribe to our Patreon. You'll be supporting a great show. You'll be supporting a great project. And you'll be giving us money, because essentially we are making this product for free. And we're not going to lock any content, to be very clear, but if you want to support our show, please feel free to throw us a couple dollars here and there. Once again, the tiers are listed on the last episode, so listen to that, and they're also listed, of course, on our Patreon page. But whatever you want to donate to our Patreon, please donate, because we want your we want your support. We want your support because we love our fans.
In all seriousness, I'm really bad at self-promotion. I always have been. I think I'm pretty good at promoting other people's shit that I like. I struggle with promoting my own thing, but I do want to say, like, of course, as Taylor said, there's no locked content. As of right now, the show we've been making, we enjoy doing it. We're going to continue doing the show as it does, whether people donate or not. And we don't have any direct plans to do any, like, huge, ambitious extra projects. We have kind of ideas down the pipeline, but anything that you would donate that, we would obviously appreciate it. But for me, it's like having something to incentivize us to kind of like go like, okay, people, if you like the show and you want to respond to it, that would give us an indication that, we could kind of broaden what we want to do or what we want to talk about. And of course, hey, if you want to donate and then pester us about things we should talk about or send me money maybe under the table to promote your projects, I could potentially do that. Possibilities are endless if you'll send me money.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. But yes, once again, please support us on Patreon. And Brian, do you have any pluggables as well?
As always, follow us at Millennials Are Old Podcast on Facebook and Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. And that is probably the most efficient and most direct way to reach us and argue with us, recommend things, show us shit. If you're really mad, if you really want to embarrass me, you can send a link to the podcast to a show that I like the Kings of Pug Pod. Really anything. That's your best way to get a hold of me and basically ruin my life is through Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram.
Yes, absolutely. So with all that out of the way, I think, Brian, this has certainly been an episode to remember. I'm feeling sick, even though I'm at home right now, and I want to go to sleep because you know what, Brian? I think you and I can both agree that I want to think about the weekend. Not once again Abel, but the weekend. So we need to end this episode because I'm thinking about the weekend.
Okay.
And have faith in me, Brian, that we can both fall asleep easily.
Well, I'm just feeling lucky that I made it out of my asshole bullshit town.
And Brian,
where they don't defend pop punk.
Exactly. And if it means a lot to you, Brian, I really enjoyed recording. I'm just doing all the A Day to Remember references, so...
they love it. They eat it up like seals. They love it.
They really fucking do. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight. And you know what? Next episode will also be an episode to remember. Not directly about A Day to Remember, to be very clear, but it will be another episode to remember for sure. So have a good night, everybody.